My name is John Bryce. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to assume that everybody in this room already knows what you're allowed to spray on your hops. If not, now would be a great time to relocate to Laura's presentation in the other room, because nothing I'm going to say here today can help a hop grower who doesn't already know the answer to the title of Laura's presentation. As you can see, my presentation is divided into two very different parts. So how can some guy from the Lupulin exchange give you a brewer's perspective? Well, you see that 23-year-old knucklehead over there who thought it was a good idea to go into debt and open a microbrewery before craft beer was cool or even called craft beer? Well, I am said knucklehead. You might find this hard to believe, but during the early 2000s, one of my biggest challenges in Southwest Virginia was explaining to consumers what a pale ale was and why they should put down their Bud Light and give it a try. I was able to produce some pretty good beers through a combination of dumb luck, a healthy thirst for knowledge, persistence, and plenty of help from others. But my timing was off. I was at least 5 years too early. I was undercapitalized and inexperienced. After 2 years of working my tail off in what I sometimes refer to as a high tuition learning experience, I shut the doors at Blacksburg Brewing Company before somebody else made me, and then got to work in some other breweries of various shapes and sizes. I learned a ton working for Jerry Bailey at Old Dominion Brewing Company, which was Virginia's largest craft brewery at the time. After about 5 years of brewing, I decided it was time to get some credentials relative to the industry that had become my livelihood, so I set off for Berlin to sharpen my skills. By the way, when I first inquired at the VLB, I asked if they could connect me to any other Americans who'd been through the program, and you'll never guess who they put me in contact with. The keynote speaker of this very conference, Mr. Scott Jennings from Sierra Nevada. After graduation, I helped build another small brewery. I also relaunched my old Blacksburg brand, this time with a nod to Germany and my newfound love of fresh German pils. By 2011, I found myself in familiar territory. I was back at Star Hill, which was now the largest craft brewery in the state. I helped rebuild the aging infrastructure, train staff, optimize process, and improve beer quality and stability exponentially. I'm very proud of what my team accomplished. After running brewery operations at Star Hill for several years, I had to scratch my entrepreneurial itch once again. By 2014, there were lots of breweries within a 2-hour drive that needed help building, expanding, optimizing process, training staff, understanding best practices, developing recipes, you name it. These are just a few of the breweries that I've served as an independent consultant in one way or another. In May of 2014, I was losing sleep over another business idea that I just couldn't shake: the eBay for hops for commercial brewers. I'd lived through a lot of changes in the industry, and I had a vision for improving outdated practices and making life better for all brewers. The team was assembled in June, and on September 22nd, 2014, 4 guys with day jobs had delivered the Lupulin exchange from concept to reality in under 120 days. Shortly after we launched the Lupulin exchange, I accepted one of only 2 paid positions with the 130-year-old Master Brewers Association of the Americas. The opportunity was too good to pass up, so now I juggle Master Brewers, the Lupulin exchange, 3 kids 5 and under, and 2 startup breweries in which my business partner Jesse and I have a stake. Okay, enough about me. I just didn't want you to think that some guy with a hop website was trying to sell you on a brewer's perspective. I'll also mention that while I make no claim to be a professional hop grower, I have grown hops in Berlin, in Blacksburg, and in Charlottesville. And as a brewer, I have visited quite a few growers, dealers, and processing plants, both on American soil and abroad. All right, so with my brewer's hat firmly affixed, let's talk about what you, the small mid-Atlantic hop grower, should not be talking about. What are some things that you can't sell us brewers on? Price. Okay, you're never going to compete on price against the major dealers we already work with, but you already know that. Here's a screenshot I took a few days ago from the Yakima Chief Hop Union online store. Can you sell your hops at these prices? No. Terroir. There's been a lot of talk about that today. Let's not get too carried away with terroir. You know what the terroir of the Mid-Atlantic is? Increased disease and pest pressure. Does soil, topography, and climate play a role in the flavor and quality of our hops and our beer? Sure. but the impact is minuscule compared to a bunch of other factors that you actually have control over. We're going to talk about some of those factors here in a few minutes. Notice that terroir always seems to be associated with wine. Winemaking is much simpler than brewing, with far less processing of ingredients. I'm no wine expert, but I'm pretty sure winemaking doesn't include steps in which the raw materials and their flavor contributions are drastically altered by heat. Local. Don't make such a big deal about being local. We already know that you're local, otherwise we wouldn't be talking to you in the first place. Now here's something you need to be really, really careful about. Us brewers understand this, but I'm not sure that everybody in this room does. Local does not equal quality. Let's talk about where quality comes from. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the Hop Quality Group. Anybody? Okay. The Hop Quality Group is 7 years old now, and it's, as you can see, it still doesn't have a website, a real website, but that's okay. They're focused on some other much more important things. Members of the Hop Quality Group include Bell's, Boston Beer, Boulevard, Brooklyn, Deschutes, Firestone Walker, Full Sail, New Belgium, New Glarus, Odell, Russian River, Sierra Nevada, and Stone. So a whole bunch of brewers that obviously don't know anything about making delicious hoppy beer, right? If you visit hop farms in Yakima, you'll see Hop Quality Group signs all over the place. The Hop Quality Group does some very important things on behalf of commercial brewers everywhere. They inspect hop farms and encourage growers to raise the bar in regards to food safety and other best practices. In other words, you don't want the rafters of your kiln full of shitting birds when these guys show up. The Hop Quality Group also helps inform growers as to what brewers do and don't want. This type of dialogue is very necessary if the brewer is to make the best possible product. If you don't inform the supplier of what you want, they're just going to do whatever makes the most economic sense on their end, and why wouldn't they? During the 2013 Master Brewers Annual Conference, Tom Nielsen of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company presented some very important work that you folks especially are fools if you don't use to your own competitive advantage. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to read a little bit of it. During the 2012 hop harvest, the Craft Brewers Hop Quality Group conducted a study focusing on drying air temperature and aroma quality of dried hops. The commercial method of drying hops in the United States utilizes an upward flow of dry, heated air through a single tier or bed of hops. Variables include variables such as air velocity, air moisture content, bed depth, and air temperature contribute to the effectiveness of drying and the resulting aromatic, physical, and storing properties of dried hops. The effects of air temperature were studied in 2 hop varietals and 2 hop kilns located in the Yakima Valley in Washington. The primary goal of this study was to gauge the overall quality effects of drying hops at 130 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to summarize some of the findings, but I strongly encourage each of you to study Tom's presentation on your own. You can access it from the Master Brewers online store. Let me show you how to do that now. First, you go to mbaa.com. Then you're going to want to click on store over there in the top navigation. Then from there, you're going to click on conference proceedings in the left-hand navigation. Scroll down to the 2013 conference proceedings, and there you go, you're off to the races. $50 is a pretty small investment for access to a whole bunch of information that will help you improve your process, your hops, and my beer. So how are your hops being dried? Do you have enough airflow? What's the temperature? What's the bed depth? What decisions drove your kiln design? Did you design it to be as inexpensive as possible? Or did you design it to produce high quality hops? Do you even understand what's required to produce hops that are of high quality? Or are you just relying on local and expecting us brewers to swoon over whatever comes out of your hop yard? Just like kilning during the malting process, your actions have a direct impact on the quality of your final product, which is my raw material. If you're about to build a kiln or working to improve yours ahead of harvest, remember this: the more airflow, the better. Here's a typical kiln on a farm in the Yakima Valley. It may look big to you, but lately these things feel small to a lot of growers who need to turn them over as quickly as possible to handle both expanded acreage and the tightening of the harvest window due to changes in the varietal mix. If you'd like to better understand what exactly is causing some of the pressure, I recommend checking out this webinar that Pete Mahoney from John I. Haas did about a year ago. He explains how the mix of varietals has changed significantly and what that means for growers. You could write this off as information from the Pacific Northwest that doesn't really apply to your tiny little operation here in the Mid-Atlantic, or you could look at this as a learning opportunity to be more strategic with your varietal mix so you can better spread out the load on your limited equipment and labor. Master Brewers members can access this webinar on demand from the education tab at mbaa.com. Oh yeah, and here's another more recent webinar from the same folks with updates about breeding, promising selections, and more. Okay, so back to our kilns. So here's the typical kiln in Yakima, and here's a typical kiln on a traditional farm in Germany. As you know, the farms there are significantly more quaint over there. Which of those kilns looks easier and less expensive to retrofit, or better yet, engineer properly up front in the case of new growers, which many of you are? This one or this one? Which of those kilns represents greater loss capacity if you decide to decrease the bed depth a little bit to produce better quality hops? Raise your hand if you know what the term hop storage index means. Anybody care to explain it to the group in the back? Anybody? Lee, can I pick on you?
Sure. It's basically a measure of hop quality. The quality is often impacted by oxygen, which causes oxidation, and also by temperature.
Yeah. So it's essentially a measurement of shelf life and how quickly the brewer can expect those hops to deteriorate. So, you know, in the hop quality group study, a higher HSI, which is bad, was observed in hops dried at 150 versus 130 Fahrenheit. HSI is very important to a brewer. When you go to the grocery store to buy a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread, do you check the expiration dates? Of course you do. You don't want to eat food that's gone bad. You know, well, us brewers, we don't want to brew beer with hops that have deteriorated any more than you want to serve waffles to your kids made with buttermilk that expired 3 weeks ago. I've never done that. Ask my wife. Warmer drying temperatures in your kiln drive off more of the essential oil that us brewers so desperately want these days. By the way, this was observed not only in the laboratory, but also in the aroma of piled cooled hops. So let that serve as a friendly reminder not to forget about the free and very sensitive instrument right on your face, courtesy of God Almighty. Speaking of aromas, the hop quality group observed strong onion and garlic aromas in samples collected from the bottom of kilns compared to the middle and the top. These aromas were more severe and more widespread in kilns that were running warmer air. Guess what? It's more expensive to dry hops with cooler air. The hop quality group found that drying at 130 degrees Fahrenheit both took longer and burned more fuel, but produced better quality hops. That added expense and reduced kiln capacity is a much bigger problem if you're a large-scale grower competing on price. We already know that you can't compete on price, so you better be competitive on quality. All other things being equal, if you can produce hops that have been dried at lower temperatures with higher airflows, I, the brewer, am willing to pay a premium for your hops because I know they will have more oil, better aroma, longer shelf life, and make better beer. But remember, your quality isn't better because your farm is local or because your operation is quaint. In fact, odds are it's probably worse. Us brewers are already skeptical of your quality. You're competing with folks out west who've been doing this for generations and have invested millions in infrastructure. But if you're crafty and you focus on engineering quality into your process, you can sell that, and us brewers, we just might buy it. How many of you guys have been to Yakima in September during hop selection? I know Lee has, there's a few people, okay? It's kind of like visiting a really complicated fish market. Each year, a greater percentage of breweries send folks all the way out to Yakima for this process. Why? Well, I think Hunter S. Thompson said it best. Everyone wants to make a better glass of beer, and to do that, you need better ingredients. Those jerks who live out in Portland, Seattle, and other areas just a short drive from Yakima, some of them will drive out to Yakima weekly during hop selection. It's no wonder those guys make some really amazing hoppy beers. If you'd like to learn more about hop selection, you might check out the Master Brewers Tech Tip I wrote about it a couple of years ago. It includes strategies for brewers to use during selection to get the best possible hops. So here's basically what happens. In an incredibly stressful balancing act, growers get busy juggling, picking, and separating, and drying, and cooling, and baling, and delivering those bales to hop dealers. Meanwhile, pretty much the entire brewing industry descends on Yakima to select their hops from brewers' cuts and core samples from various bales, from various lots, from various farms. As a brewer, hop selection is equal parts luck and skill. From Virginia, I have to plan my trip weeks ahead of harvest. I have to get on the dealer's schedule, and most of us brewers are contracting and visiting multiple dealers during selection. There's no way to know exactly which varieties will come off the farm during your window of time in Yakima. Unless your travel plans are extremely flexible and you have great relationships with dealers, it's hard to arrive at just the right moment. And even if you do, there's still no telling whether the brewer who selected an hour before you picked the same lots that you would have or prefers totally different aromas. Then you have to play this odd little game of matching lot sizes to your contract. Lot 14556L9 only has 5 bales remaining. Lot 29978 has 12 bales left, but maybe you need 3 more bales and don't like any of the remaining lots. Come back tomorrow, they say. We think more will show up by lunch, but we're not sure. It's a nerve-wracking whirlwind of a time in a place where every car steering wheel is covered in sticky yellow lupulin, and you can literally smell hops in the air everywhere you go, day or night. So all of this brings me to yet another competitive advantage that the small hop grower that I don't see you guys taking advantage of. First, are you inviting brewers to come select bales? Why not? Second, the dealer pellet plants in Yakima are huge. They have to blend a lot of bales in a single run. You don't. Some of you are small enough to be able to trace a bag of pellets back to a single bale. Wow, you mean as a brewer, I can show up and say, look, I want this bale right here that came from the southwest corner of your yard and has that big juicy aroma that I can tell must have been kilned with low temperature and high airflow. The smaller you are, the more you can customize. There are some other opportunities to customize that you should be taking advantage of, one of which is pellet density. Here's a presentation from the Master Brewers Archive that covers the qualification of hop pellets for dry hopping at a brewery that makes some pretty phenomenal dry hop beers. How a hop pellet dissolves in a fermenter can make all the difference in the world. The density of hop pellets that are tossed in the brew kettle doesn't really matter, but for dry hopping, a pellet that never fully dissolves or takes too many hours to do so represents wasted time and money as well as missed opportunity of aroma extraction. Back when I was at Dominion, I remember climbing into 200-barrel fermenters to retrieve spent bags of hops after filtering tanks of Tupper's Hot Pocket Ale. Few things are sadder than cutting into one of those huge beer-soaked bags only to find a bunch of bone-dry hops right in the middle of the bag. This topic was also presented at the last World Brewing Congress. The World Brewing Congress is a global joint effort put on by the American Society of Brewing Chemists, the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, the Brewery Convention of Japan, the European Brewing Congress, and the Institute for Brewing and Distilling. It brings together the world's top brewing scientists every 4 years, and this time there were a ton of presentations and posters about hops and dry hopping. Here's another World Brewing Congress presentation that looked at the impact of pellet enrichment on beer flavor. As you know, some larger operations like Boston Beer are purchasing customized pellets that have been enriched to specs somewhere between the traditional T90 and T45. The smaller the processor is, the more flexibility they have to do things like this. Here's a presentation from the World Brewing Congress by Takako Inui of Suntory, reporting results from studying the role of harvest time and pruning date on aroma characteristics. Harvest time was the most influential factor in determining hop aroma characteristics during the various cultivation factors. Compounds associated with floral, fruity, and citrus characteristics are highly dependent on the harvest time or pruning date. Hop aroma quality in beer can be controlled by altering the hop harvest time and pruning date. I personally know brewers who have communicated to their dealers that they specifically want hops to come from bales that were harvested within a specific window. This is the kind of dialogue you need to have with brewers. Invite us to your farm to evaluate hops at various dates within the harvest window to help you pick the optimal harvest date. So to conclude part one, customize, customize, customize.